Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to today's episode of Boss Economics World. The story of the day is a riveting one. Trump's return to office, his selection of key foreign policy hardliners, and the inevitable economic spiral that could follow. Today, we're going to dissect Trump's latest picks for his administration, Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz, and their aggressive stance on China. What does this mean for the global economy? What does it mean for US-China relations? And most importantly, how will this affect your jobs, your savings, and the future of this already volatile global economy? Buckle up, because this deep dive analysis is going to hit some nerves. When Donald Trump stormed into office the first time, he openly declared economic war on China. Remember that trade war? Tariffs after tariffs. Some people thought this was just political posturing. Turns out, the impact went far deeper than that. Here we go again. With Trump back and surrounded by China hawks like Rubio and Waltz, we're not just in for another round of political drama. Oh no, we're looking at a much deeper crisis that will affect Americans and the global economy for years to come. First off, let's focus on Marco Rubio, likely to become Secretary of State. Rubio, ladies and gentlemen, is no stranger to contentious US-China relations. Go back to 2018 to 2020, when Rubio openly criticized China's handling of Hong Kong and Xinjiang, getting slapped with sanctions from Beijing. That's right, the man couldn't even get a flight to China because he's sanctioned. This alone is a pretty bad signal that China won't come to the negotiating table if Rubio becomes the face of US diplomacy. When diplomacy falters, you know what happens next: economic fallout. Now on to Mike Waltz, who's expected to serve as National Security Advisor. Waltz has made it absolutely clear that China is the biggest threat to US national and economic security. Recently, in The Economist, Waltz even called for a military buildup to directly counter Chinese influence in Taiwan. And Taiwan, my friends, is the flashpoint that could ignite a geopolitical and economic powder keg that would make the 2018 trade war look like a sparring match. China sees Taiwan as integral to its national sovereignty, while the US insists on protecting it. Imagine the scenario where both sides gamble on military conflict. Trade disruptions? Yes. Global markets in a freefall? Absolutely. That iPhone in your hand? Imagine it costing you double what it does today. What I'm trying to say is this: brace yourselves. Remember 2018? The first round of US-China trade tariffs slashed billions from global GDP. The US stock markets went for a roller coaster ride, while China's growth, for the first time in decades, didn't hit its double-digit target. That trade war wasn't just about goods like steel or electronics either. The ripples were felt everywhere, from soybean farmers in Iowa to high-tech manufacturers in Shenzhen. Now, imagine all of that, but worse. This will not just be about tariffs. Trump, Rubio, and Waltz are likely to take a more confrontational stance that plunges diplomacy between two powerhouse economies into a deep freeze. What happens when the world's two largest economies aren't talking? Prices rise, supply chains break, and economic confidence collapses. And here's the kicker: it's not just the US and China that will hurt. No, everyone gets a seat at this table of economic misery. Whether you're in Europe, Africa, or Southeast Asia, the ripple effect of this second trade war will be enormous. You think inflation is bad now? Well, just wait. Now, let's take a look at some core numbers to understand how critical the situation could get. In 2019, the US-China trade war shaved 0.5% off China's GDP growth. The global economy lost around $850 billion due to direct trade losses. And how does that look in 2023? Let me add recent statistics to our discussion. Current forecasting models from the International Monetary Fund, IMF, suggest that a second major disruption in US-China trade relations could cost the global economy up to $1.4 trillion by 2025. Yes, you heard me right, $1.4 trillion lost in trade, growth, and financial confidence. The US doesn't walk away unscathed either. In 2019, US manufacturers reported over $32 billion in direct losses from the trade war's tariffs, and farmers felt a hit of $16 billion in reduced exports, particularly soybeans. But here's the thing: the impact goes far deeper this time around because we're in an already fragile economic environment following COVID-19 and current geopolitical instability in the Middle East. According to JP Morgan's latest report, the current inflation rate of 6% in the US could soar to double digits if new sanctions, tariffs, and economic barriers get slapped onto Chinese imports. You got that? Rubio and Waltz are not your run-of-the-mill policymakers. Their hawkish views, shared by Trump's inner circle, suggest a strong pivot towards military and industrial buildup in response to any Chinese economic or geopolitical pressure on issues like Taiwan. Rubio called for an increase in defense spending not just to counter China diplomatically, but militarily. Waltz, with his extensive military background, emphasizes strategic dominance. But let me make this very clear, if a heavier focus on defense spending comes into play, expect to see less emphasis on economic diplomacy, and more emphasis on military posturing. This could ultimately strain budgets that are now used to keeping domestic welfare programs running, putting further pressure on America's lower and middle class, who've just started to breathe again after the pandemic. Taiwan is crucial in the supply chain for critical technologies like semiconductors, representing over 60% of the global market, with Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, leading the game. Any disruption in the US or China's relationship over Taiwan will shake this critical tech foundation to the core. Imagine losing access to the microchips that power everything from your smartphone to your electric vehicle to AI. We're talking about massive supply chain disruptions that will plummet economies worldwide into recession. Rubio's and Waltz's call for reviewing defense spending means one thing: expect more aggressive US military posturing. As tensions rise, particularly in areas like the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait, supply chains will come under immense strain due to both military pressures and resultant trade restrictions. But there's more bad news. The Taiwan issue might escalate into a long-term conflict that disrupts the future of global trade, magnifying import prices on key commodities. Just remember, Taiwan semiconductors are indispensable to nearly every major industry. A disruption here means a tech crash there and a global economic catastrophe. Everyone gets hurt. This renewed tension between the US and China, especially with hawks like Rubio and Waltz leading US policy, is not happening in an economic vacuum. Global inflation rates are already lingering at multi-decade highs. According to IMF data, 2024 global inflation rates could spike an additional 2-3% if friction between the US and China escalates again. Energy prices already harmed by Russia's war in Ukraine, set to increase even more if key energy partnerships and supply chains break down. Let's not forget, if a recession follows, labor markets will get slammed. Forget about the modest job growth recovered post-pandemic. You're now looking at more unemployment, rising underemployment, and dropping wages as businesses close, investments freeze, and governments fail to effectively address the situation. Moreover, the tech sector will be ground zero for economic collapse here. Over 30% of US-based tech companies depend on Chinese supply chains for assembly, production, or raw materials. If Rubio and Waltz manage to burn more bridges with China, these companies won't just face shortages, they'll face collapse. This will lead to an even deeper. Stay tuned for the full commentary. The future of the US-China relationship affects your wallet more than you think. Economic volatility is on the horizon, but remember, understanding is key, and we'll walk through this together, as we always do.